but they didn't vote to turn Ukraine over to Russia. They didn't vote to do many of the other things that Trump is doing. They didn't vote to close the education department, which was announced today. They didn't vote to eliminate 70,000 veterans from the VA and from other posts in the federal government. They didn't vote for many of these things.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today we've had Larry Sabato on the show. He's the Director of Center for Politics and the author of The Kennedy Half Century. He's spoken to us about Trump's big speech yesterday towards Congress, what he made of it. He's spoken to us about the Trump administration and Elon Musk's DOGE decision to cut jobs from the Department of Veterans Affairs and what that means for Trump's popularity, because veterans are incredibly important to a voter base. So all that today on the Trump Report, including, of course, relationships with allies, relationships with Ukraine and with Russia. So you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube. Larry Sabato, a Director of Center for Politics and author of The Kennedy Half Century. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with yesterday's news. Donald Trump, he made his first joint session speech to Congress where he went for an hour and 40 minutes. It was very much a campaign speech full of accomplishments, attacks on Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, and of course vows to tackle wokeness, the economy, and anyone else who wants to stand in his way. So what were your impressions of the speech?
Well, it was hard on my ear. I have literally listened to every State of the Union or equivalent. This was the equivalent since 1961, John F. Kennedy's first. And there's never been a speech like this. And I'm not referring to the length. I'm referring to the divisiveness and the partisanship. We're not used to that, at least in the State of the Union addresses. Usually presidents, or almost always presidents, try to unify the country. They try to bring the two parties together about at least some common goals. Obviously, Trump had no interest in doing that. Now, it's true the Democrats were very resistant to him. They have been consistently, but he's created a lot of that himself. And he could have done something about it in this very long speech, but there wasn't a line that you could interpret as an olive branch.
You're right. It was a very divisive speech. I think he mentioned Joe Biden's name about 12 times and said he was the worst president in American history. And whether you believe that or not, Larry, you're right. This is kind of the event to unify the country and be looking forward and not backwards. But when you were watching it, what did you find were the most alarming things he said? A lot of people thought that the mention of Greenland was the most alarming thing, because he said that the US would take it one way or the other. And it kind of alarmed people because it was quite a Putin-esque comment to say about an autonomous country.
Yes, you don't know whether he's serious or not, and he's mercurial. He could change tomorrow or next week or a year from now. But if I were among the approximately 60,000 people living in Greenland, I would be a little bit nervous, because it's just like Trump to do something that makes no sense at all. And so we know why we would like to have greater cooperation with Greenland. It's mainly for national defense, but this is not the way to do it. He is making enemies, and he's alienating friends. There are new polls out of Canada showing that once our closest ally, even closer in terms of public support than the United Kingdom, they now are strongly opposed to us, and they're angry at us, and they plan to do things that we don't normally associate with sweet Canadians. So in Canada, in Greenland, in Panama, he's creating problems, serious problems, and it will take a long time to work out of them.
Do you think that will get worse, Larry, now that he has enacted these 25% tariffs on Mexico and on Canada? We don't need to worry about China because they were obviously rivals before that. But Mexico and Canada, two big allies, not to mention two big trading partners.
Oh, absolutely. These are his new toys. And he loves stirring the pot. He loves causing distress. He said many times during this campaign that his second non-consecutive term would be about revenge and retribution. And his supporters said, oh, he's just talking. That's just an exaggeration. No, he meant it. It's
Mm.
obvious that he meant it. He's doing it every day. Remember, most of the senior international leaders really were not for him. They had hoped that either Biden would be reelected or that Vice President Harris could win the election. They were dreading this second Trump term, and they didn't, in Trump's view, treat him well in his first term. He's getting revenge on every one of them, and he enjoys it. This is what gets him up in the morning. I don't know if he ever goes to sleep. Actually, he tweets or posts on Truth Social in the middle of the night, but it's what gets him up.
Mm. A lot of former advisors in his first administration said that, Larry. They said he never sleeps, he's always up. When there was a question about his age, because he's obviously in his late 70s, and a lot of people said no, he works all hours of the day. But in another act from Elon Musk's Doge, it's been revealed that the Department of Veterans Affairs plans to cut around 70 to 80,000 jobs from the agency that helps provide millions of American veterans with healthcare and other services. Now, the plan is to get the number of national employees back to 400,000, which was the amount that it had around 2019. So how much of an impact do you think this will have on American veterans? Because we know that about 20% of the workforce are veterans themselves.
Well, the experts in the VA say this is going to directly affect the delivery of benefits and services. And, if there's one group I would not want to alienate, it would be veterans. They are activists. They believe correctly, because of their service to the country and their patriotism, that they have a special place in Americans' hearts, and they are listened to about these sorts of things. And it's a rare Democrat or Republican who wants to cross the veterans. They also lean pretty substantially Republican. So
Mm.
Trump is actually going after one of his own constituencies. It's a mystery as to why Trump is going along with Musk. It's obvious why Musk wants to do it. He's simply cutting everything. He's not interested in the usual constituency complaints, and he's equating veterans with all the other constituencies. As I say, a big mistake, and it's going to come back to bite Trump.
Yes. Do you think this will impact his popularity overall? Because even if you aren't a veteran yourself, a lot of right-wing and right-leaning Americans are very pro-veterans, very pro-taking care of them. And a Rolling Stone article read this morning, Larry, the headline is, "Trump loves our military, he just hates taking care of them." Is that your thought?
Yes, I think that sums it up very well. Look, it's clear that Trump, well, I assume he's in his final term. You never know. And he has talked repeatedly with his own people, sometimes joking, sometimes serious, about seeking a third term. Or who knows, there could be a national emergency. There could be martial law. Martial law was actually discussed by some of his assistants, and I think with Trump himself, at the end of Trump's first term, in order to prevent Biden from taking over. So maybe it's that he simply doesn't care at this point, whether he's not seeking reelection or whether he is, because he'll stack the deck in his own favor. But I think he's really playing with fire here.
Mm.
Veterans and some of the other groups that he's deeply offended, and I'm not talking about federal workers, they're not necessarily sympathetic. They may be to me, they may be to you, but to the average American, they're not. But there are certain constituencies that are sacrosanct, and veterans clearly constitute one.
This week, Larry, Donald Trump, he also officially cut intelligence sharing with Ukraine. That, coupled with the fact that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth ordered the US command to halt offensive cyber relations against Russia. So these two big things happened. What does that say, do you think, says about the state of the relationship the US now has with both Russia and Ukraine?
I don't know whether Trump has some private arrangement with Putin. Many Americans do. Democrats generally do. But whether he does or not, everything that we've seen so far, and even prior to this term, suggests that Reagan is very sympathetic. Reagan, he's not Reagan. Trump is very sympathetic to the Russians. And he's also antagonistic towards Zelensky because he believes Zelensky did not help him win re-election. He didn't do what Trump asked him to do, which was to look into Joe and Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's arrangement with one of the key corporations in Ukraine. Now, I can't get into the details of that. It would take the rest of your time. But I can tell you this is part of the revenge and retribution tour. He had it in for Zelensky before the Oval Office event. And it's incredibly clear to everyone here. He has no intention of helping Zelensky beyond what will assist him in getting this peace and his Nobel Peace Prize, which he also discusses all the time.
Mm. A lot of my guests, actually, Larry, have on numerous occasions said that a lot of his decisions do come down to the Nobel Peace Prize. So you're just another person to point that out. But how detrimental do you think it will be for Ukraine to defend itself now that they've had both the military aid cut off from the US and now they don't have access to intelligence?
Well, it's obviously making it very difficult for Ukraine, and that's where Europe is stepping up. I actually think it's a very good thing that Europe is beginning to take seriously the fact that they can no longer rely on the United States. And that would be my advice to them. As long as Trump is in power, you cannot rely on the United States. The history means nothing. NATO means nothing. If something happened, if Russia invaded one of the NATO countries, it's no better than 50-50 that the United States would come to support that nation and support the NATO alliance, whatever Article 5 says.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron, he said he's gathering a group of European leaders ready to send troops to Ukraine next week. But Russia, of course, have pushed back on any plans of peacekeeping troops being stationed there. Macron, he then urged European leaders that they need to be ready for if the US is no longer by our side. We just spoke about this, but how dire is the state of this relationship, this allyship between the US, the UK, and the EU?
Well, it is dire. It's obvious that it is. Look, both the British Prime Minister and President Macron did everything they could in visiting Trump to play up to him, to praise him. He's the greatest thing since cream cheese and sliced bread. You know, the most significant person since human history was recorded. And they did everything they could. Another state visit to visit the king. It's incredible, all the things that they did that they've never done for another president because they didn't have to. And you see what it got them? Nothing, nothing. And that is what Europe is coming to terms with, and they must come to terms with it. President I studied a lot, wrote a long book about President Kennedy, wrote after World War II his thesis, Why England Slept, Why England Slept. And it's important for Europe not to sleep through this. And from everything I've seen, they're not.
Larry, I do think that whatever we want to say about Donald Trump, I think the only positive outcome out of this entire situation, it has prompted the UK and the EU to step up their military spending, to step up the defence, to be ready, on alert, without relying on the United States, as you said. But if the US does withdraw from NATO, do you think it's understandable that the EU and the UK should start fast-tracking their nuclear defence?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And truth be told, if they had had a crystal ball and could have known what Trump would say and do, and there were indications, but you never knew what Trump would actually follow through on, they should already have done it. They should have been developing this all along. But France is in a reasonably good position, and others are too. So this is the time to move forward, and they should move forward rapidly. It's going to cost a great deal of money. The money has to be spent.
Do you think that Trump is destroying world order like Ukraine's ambassador to the UK says?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do. He loves being a disruptor, and disruptors can be quite constructive, at least in private business. But you do not disrupt all of the business of government in foreign policy and in domestic policy. And that is what Trump is doing all at once in a hasty fashion without proper planning. And he's doing it because He simply enjoys doing it. He wants to be the world's greatest disruptor for all time.
Mm.
And he's well on his way to that accomplishment, if you can call that an achievement. But it's not good for the rest of the world. And it's certainly not good for the NATO alliance. And it's not good for our longest allies, our longest term allies in Europe.
And it will be interesting to see what happens with alliances like Five Eyes and with AUKUS. Actually, Larry, we'll see if the United States continues with those treaties, those partnerships with various other countries. But how do you think Americans are reacting to Donald Trump's approach to ending the Russia-Ukraine war? Now, there's so much polling that comes out. A lot of the general polling is somewhat favourable of him. It's pretty much tied, 40% here and there. But a new poll found that just 21% strongly approve of his handling of the war, 36% strongly disapprove. Do you find that Americans are divisive over this topic?
Oh, absolutely. Look, what did Americans vote for? Now, you can argue about whether they were wise in casting their votes, but they voted for lower prices. They voted for lower prices and a stronger border, a stronger southern border. Both are very legitimate concerns. The Biden administration simply didn't do an effective job on either one, granted. But they didn't vote to turn Ukraine over to Russia. They didn't vote to do many of the other things that Trump is doing. They didn't vote to close the education department, which was announced today. They didn't vote to eliminate 70,000 veterans from the VA and from other posts in the federal government. They didn't vote for many of these things. So I think they're waking up to the fact that Trump's priorities on the campaign trail are not his priorities in office.
Just finally, Larry, is Trump's ego driving every decision that he's making for the US?
Oh, absolutely. He gave it away right in the beginning of that proto State of the Union address. He actually said he was the greatest president ever and had already eclipsed our first president, George Washington. No, not even close. In fact, I participated in the studies, the presidential rating studies. Do you know where he shows up? And he has consistently since his first term? Last place, 46, and now it will be 47. Last place. And that includes a president who died after 1 month in office.
Mm. Larry Sabato, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
You're more than welcome. Enjoyed speaking with you.